Welcome to Into the Words, a podcast from the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. Today in the cabin are our dear friends Jen Keenan and Mallory Grigg. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi, thank you.
Thanks so much for being with us this week with the Illustration Intensive Workshop.
Yeah,
it's
we're
an honor.
excited. Thank you.
Will you, Mallory, introduce yourself and say hello?
So I am an art director at Macmillan Children's Publishing Group. I work on across 4 different imprints. The first one is Fywell and Friends. The second is Henry Holt Books for Young Readers. The third is Swoon Reads. And then we all work kind of across this paperback imprint called Squarefish. So I work on everything from picture books all the way up to YA, middle grade, leveled readers. Anything you can put in front of someone who's under 18, I work on it.
Wow, it sounds like there must be a lot of books in a year.
It's a lot of books, but it's a lot of fun. The variety is really fun for me.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And Jen, tell us about you.
Sure. So I am also an art director at Macmillan Children's Publishing, but I oversee Roaring Brook Press and FSG, and then I also do the Squarefish reprints, paperbacks. I mostly do picture books. That's kind of my main focus, but I also do middle grade and YA nonfiction as well.
Wow, great. Well, thanks for joining us this week. Let's talk a little bit about what you're doing here. You had a Q&A yesterday, and give us a flavor for what that was about.
Jen and I have a 2-woman act. It's
We're
like
going to take it on the road.
mild comedy, but mostly our goal is to help illustrators kind of learn how to get to the next level and whatever they can do to keep their inspiration high and, develop the skills that they need to become professional artists. So
I think we try to be genuine and honest and approachable and have fun with it and not scare people too much.
But with a lot of these kind of Q&A discussions and illustrator-led events, like it really can be whatever the illustrators want it to be. They can drive us wherever they want to go, and we try to give them answers to whatever questions they have for us. Help them out a little bit.
So what were some of the things the illustrators were asking yesterday?
A lot about what art directors and editors look for in a portfolio when people are starting out.
And there's also a lot of questions about how to stay in touch.
Or how to get yourself in front of people.
Yeah, the best ways to find exposure, the best ways to network, the best ways to build those relationships with people in the industry. So I thought it was a fascinating discussion.
How does that work in today's day and age? Do they still have portfolio showcases that you go to?
At SCBWI and places here like Highlights, we'll see physical portfolios.
And like recent graduations of schools in the New York City area, we'll go to those. And sometimes we'll send our art directors or designers out to schools nearby. Like one of my senior designers this year went out to Philly to look at their recent graduate portfolios.
And people go to Micah and RISD sometimes also because it's close enough to New York to...
SCWI is a really big organization. We also, people have portfolios online, and that's where we do a lot of our research is to find people on the internet, pull their images, and show them to our colleagues to see if they might be a good fit for the project.
Yeah. And sometimes agents do come in and bring various postcards and portfolios and show us some of their illustrators. So we'll look at that as well.
So this is going back a number of years when I worked editorial with the Highlights magazine, and postcards from illustrators was a big deal. Does that still happen?
I love them.
I do too.
I think postcards are the best.
We're both pro postcard, and I think we kind of do similar things. I have a bin literally labeled postcards so that I can put everything I'm sent in that bin, and then ones that I really like I'll end up pinning to my board.
And if an editor is looking for a new artist, or if I'm kind of stumped about what could happen for a project, I pull out that box and I'm like, what could fit? And I just lay everything out on the table, or I let someone else flip through it. And it's just this great resource, and it's this treasure trove of artwork that, always move. Like we just moved offices and all of the postcards came with me.
Yeah, I brought them.
Yeah.
And something I was talking about a little bit last night is for my group, one of my designers, Monique, who's amazing, she helped me with a project that I've been wanting to do for a while where we set up an internal Tumblr where we can put tons of artists that maybe are hard to find elsewhere, or just so we don't have to dig each time, but kind of it's a nice way to have a diverse range of illustrators right in front of us. So if I find someone interesting on a postcard, I might input them onto the Tumblr, or if I meet someone here, I might put them onto the Tumblr. So I'm trying to slowly build that so we have a wider.
Yeah, because when you talked about finding people online, how does that actually work? Like, do you say, "Oh, I want an illustrator with blank style," and then start Googling in that?
Sometimes.
Sometimes, and that's another reason why I wanted to start the blog, because we hashtag things by style, so that if I am looking for something specific, I can kind of start there. I go on Instagram a lot and we'll look at hashtags. I go on Women Who Draw a lot because you can make certain checkpoints about orientation and gender and nationality, so that we can find a wide range of new talent.
I really like Twitter a lot. I'll frequently post something that I'm looking for and ask for the community to send me names of people that they think would be a good fit. And I found quite a few artists that way by just looking through that thread of people and trying to find someone that I think my team will respond to.
And so in this Q&A session, were there a lot of questions about just this piece of how do I get seen, or were there also questions you said about how to prepare a portfolio?
Yeah, I feel like in this session there were quite a few people who are newer to illustration. So I think the beginning of the session started with portfolio building. Like, what kind of pieces do I need to have in my portfolio? What are you looking for? And we got to speak a little bit to the depth and the breadth of what we want to see in someone's book and what's important to show and what's maybe less important. So I think for that it was portfolio building.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about character building, which Kelly Light also talked about, and how that's an important thing to see in your portfolio, so that I know you can continue a character through a range of emotions, whether it's spot art, sometimes in a scene, so that I can visualize like, okay, this person can take a character and take them through a story. So sometimes it's helpful to have a couple series pieces. And I know there was a lot of questions like, is there a specific number that we have to have in a series? And I don't personally need, but if I see that like you've repeated a character a few times and it's in a scene, and I recommend a variety of like perspective and close up, further back, showing that you can do kind of every angle of that character. That's really helpful because then you can visualize, okay, they can do a full book.
I agree.
So there's building the portfolio, then there's how to share it and how to get it out. What other kinds of questions do they have?
One person, I know a lot of questions I get is like, I have a couple different styles. Is that okay? Like, do I just have to have one style? And I think years ago, I remember being told as a student, like, you have to pick one style. But I think now people are open that
To a range
of styles.
Yeah.
But I would recommend having multiple items of that style and just make it easy for the art director to see like, oh, okay, this is their like watercolor style. This is their digital style. Whether it's breaking it out a certain way in the portfolio or having it, however you want to do it, but having enough of each style also, like the same
to
rules.
show consistency, that you can keep the style up for the length of a 32-page book. One other thing we mentioned in terms of multiple styles is if we have a middle grade book that we're illustrating, we want you to be able to do your style on the cover, but we might also want you to draw black and white images or one color images or two color images for the interior of the book. So showing that you have that ability to draw in one or two colors is also really valuable.
What does illustration in a middle grade book look like? Is it usually just the chapter heads?
Sometimes it's chapter heads. I think more and more frequently, we're starting to see pieces of art that are interspersed in the chapters. So you might have like 10 to 12 spot illustrations or 6 to 8 full-page illustrations that break up some of the text so that you get an idea of what this character looks like and what their world looks like. But you don't have to lean quite as heavily on the artwork because these readers are becoming more powerful in their abilities. So,
and for nonfiction also, we're leaning more towards illustrated nonfiction. Not always. It depends on the book, but we're trying to make them feel more modern and approachable so that kids want to read the nonfiction. So we've done a few with full illustrated covers, and then it's kind of the same thing as the middle grade and YA. Well, not as much YA, but they'll do the spot art throughout. So if it's about a person or group of people, it's kind of fun when the kids are looking through to see a one-color illustration of the person that's being talked about in the text. So being able to translate that from full color to just simple line work is nice to see.
Jen, you mentioned you have a document, like a little cheat
Yes.
sheet. Talk to me a little bit. What is that? Tell us about it.
So I like to work with new artists as well as the veterans. So, but anytime you try something new, I know, especially from going to these conferences and being on the flip side of it, going to a conference and learning, you're nervous because you don't know what the process is. You don't know what to expect. You don't necessarily, as a new illustrator, understand the rounds of changes that you might have to make in a picture book. So I try to be kind of as open and honest from the get-go of a project. So I've put together just a little checklist, kind of what the process is going to be. So round one is sketches and how many rounds the sketches tend to go through. And then after we get through the sketches, there's final art, and I'm doing air quotes right now.
There's artwork that comes in that may or may not be final.
Yes, because it's the first time everyone's seeing color. So then, our PE team and the editors and myself, we're all going through and making sure things are consistent, that the color doesn't suddenly change abruptly. So you'll still have some tweaks since it's the first time seeing color. I personally try to not introduce brand new changes at that point because I don't think that's fair if you've seen something since sketch one way. But sometimes you notice that something is like inconsistent or, so sometimes there's that as well, but we try to keep it more to a minimum at that point. Hopefully at that point you do that round and you're done. It really depends on the book. We've had some go on, definitely. But that's the goal, kind of to have those 3 rounds. I also talk about the rule of 3. So if you're doing spot art and you just have one page that has spot art and the rest is full bleed, it kind of maybe feels like a mistake. So I recommend, like, if you're going to do something, or panels, or like 3 spots on a page, find a couple other places to do that as well, so that it feels like a choice and not just like, mistake. I talk about text placement, and I try to send, by the second round of sketches, text galleys so that people can see how long the text is. So I kind of just break down what to expect from start to finish, the types of comments you might receive, and then I put together a little packet if it's someone's first book, like I give them samples of what other artists' sketches have looked like to the final, because they're like, how tight do the sketches have to be? Like, does it have to be a masterpiece for the first round? And I'm like, no, I've literally gotten stick figures before. I mean, I'd prefer something a little tighter than that, but so I kind of just walk them through it so that they feel like they have a team.
So where in the, like, from the beginning process, where does the color palette come in? Like, does that sometimes happen at sketch stage, or?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes I'll get colored sketches in from an artist, especially if color is a big part of telling the story. It will happen really early, and sometimes it doesn't happen until the very last round.
Does that matter? Like, is color really, like, how much does an art director look and say, oh, the color's all off here, versus once you already know the artist's style enough that you can expect the palette?
I think it does matter. Yeah, I think color can be a big piece of what you're trying to tell in the story, and we go through multiple rounds of proofs, and I feel like that's where we really start to nail down the specifics of the color. We'll start with the general palette. We usually have an idea of what that artist is going to create when we look at their portfolio, but then when we get into proof stages, we have multiple press proofs printed off, and then each one goes to a different part of the team, including the illustrator, so that they and the author, or author illustrator if they're the same person.
Yeah.
So that they have a very clear idea of what this book is going to look like when it's final, because what they're seeing on their screen will most likely not match what I'm seeing on my screen. In fact, I have 2 screens in my workspace, and one of them is very green and the other one is very red. So I will actually look at the images on both screens just to get an idea of what might be going on elsewhere.
And then we sometimes talk about color while they're sketching, especially if it's a book that has a lot of emotion, because the color can drastically change the feel of a spread. Or, I have some stories where they start out really quiet and then they build. So I talk with the artist early on, and I probably find them for the style that they can do like minimal color and full color. And I might talk with them about, it would be really cool if it started really minimally, but then as the story builds, the colors build. So sometimes we'll have those conversations up front if that's a really, really important factor. And sometimes, you've worked with an artist multiple times and you just trust them and you're like, let's just see what you do.
Do you ever receive reflective art?
Yes. We do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Artists will frequently send in reflective art and then we will tag it and we will have it sent out
Label
for
each
scanning.
page.
Yeah, we label each page.
Send
We
it out for
label how
scanning.
many pieces of art per page. Sometimes we'll get art that needs to be comped together, art that's happening on different parts of the spread. And so we label each one and it gets stickered and sent to production, and then production sends it out to a professional scanning house. And then we'll also tend to have them do some gentle retouching on to make sure that it's scanned the way that the artist wanted it to be scanned. Like I've got one book that's coming up that the artist really wanted the scans to have some shadows. She worked in a lot of textural elements, so we had samples of what she wanted the scans to look like, and we sent that to the scanning house so that they could scan with those shadows in place. And the reflective art definitely still happens. I think it's maybe a little less rare in the digital age, but
Yeah, it's less, but I still love getting the reflective art.
And then when they finish scanning it, they send it back to our office and we hold on to it while we're doing the color proofing process so that we can try to match it as closely as possible to the original artwork.
And then when we do digital, I like to sometimes ask the artist for match proofs or like so that I can see what the color should look like when it's printed. 'cause
Right,
it looks so
otherwise you
different
have
than the
nothing to
screen.
go
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, but that's one cool thing about reflective art. You can look at the proofs, look at the art, talk with production about how we can get closer to the actual artwork. And that's where you get kind of geeky and nerd out about colors. Or should we do a Pantone? Should we do some sort of rhodamine instead of magenta? And we were nerding out about that a little bit last night during the Q&A.
We like to talk about the nerdy side of publishing.
Oh, yeah. That's fun. So I remember working in the production department and all those times underneath the light table trying to look back and forth and see the difference between the proofs and the original art. It's fun. So Mallory, you mentioned just before when we were talking, the questions change from being kind of a pre-published illustrator to an illustrator who's published. Talk to me a little bit about what that looks like from your perspective.
I don't really care if you've been published before or not. I think a lot of illustrators latch on to that idea that, oh, I've got a book out there, I've totally made it. But if you've got the skill, maybe you just haven't had that luck of timing to get published yet. I don't really care whether or not you've been published. I love talking to anybody that is interested in learning about the process. The thing that's most important to me is that you're passionate about the work that you're doing and that you're paying attention to your skills and working on making yourself better. So I think when we get questions from people who are newer to the process, it tends to be about portfolio building. And when we get questions from people who are published authors, it tends to be about maintaining relationships and how do you stay on an art director's radar? How do you maybe try a new style when someone knows you as these books that you've done in the past? How
Can
do
you create, if you're an author, illustrator, they'll talk with their editor about creating, if they want to create a new voice or something, how can I still do that? Is that, okay with the fan base I have now? And because people want to experiment all the time.
Sure, they're
So,
artists.
Yeah.
Which is so great. I think
yeah.
that brings a lot of freshness to the world that we're working in. I think our industry has reached this kind of pivotal moment where instead of trying to copy books that maybe have been done in the past, we've got comments coming from our sales team that are eager to find things that are new and different and feel fresh and unusual. So there's a lot of experimentation that's happening. We're throwing a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and we're just trying to see what sticks. I think that was
Kelly,
before
yeah.
that
Kelly kept saying that last night. She's like, we're throwing spaghetti at the wall. Let's see what sticks. What's sticking?
So and I
Which
think
is not
that's very
how you
true.
make spaghetti, by the way. As an Italian American, it's not. Don't throw it on the wall.
but in a creative perspective,
Sure, throw it on the wall.
trying new things, that
Yeah.
works fine.
I think it's great to show that you're experimenting. I think it's when you're trying to make those mistakes, or when you're, just not certain about what you're going to create. That's when you get the beautiful eureka moments.
Yeah,
of,
and not being
"This is new and
afraid of making
special."
a mistake.
Yeah. I think it's the people that try to make mistakes are the ones that really start to build an idea of who they are and all of the different things that they can do. So
I think Catherine was saying that one of the books she was working on, like one of the things literally was like a eureka moment that happened from a mistake in the draw
Oh, that's
book.
great.
Yeah.
So now, in addition, you did a Q&A with the group, and then you are doing some critiques. And are those one-on-one? Are they group critiques?
We're doing one-on-one. Each
Okay.
of us, I think, have split the group
half.
in half.
So how will that look? What are you expecting, or how will you manage a critique?
I always like to go into it trying to find out how I can get this artist to the next level. It doesn't matter what level you're at. You can show me sketches, you can show me final artwork, you can show me a dummy, like whatever you bring to the table. I want to work with you to figure out what it is that you need to do to get just a little bit better. Like there's always somewhere that you can improve. And so two things that I think are really great questions for illustrators to ask are, what am I doing well? What should I continue doing? And what could I be doing better? Like, where do you see maybe holes in my portfolio or things that I should be focused on improving? And I think if you go into the room asking those two questions, you come out with a lot of good feedback about how to move forward.
And obviously, the level is not the same across the board, since each person is at a different stage in their career, in their experimentation. I try to, like Mallory, focus on what is that person that I'm meeting with at that moment, what is their next level. And I also try to look through their portfolio, because some people, when they're starting out, they're just trying all different styles. So you'll flip through, and I find that naturally one piece might stand out more than the rest. And some might feel too stiff, like they're still learning, but then you'll get to one piece, and when I get to that piece, I'm always just like, tell me about this one. And 9 times out of 10, that's the one they're like, oh, I was just having fun. And I'm like, that's what you should be doing, because you can tell when someone's trying to do something versus like, you know what, I'm just going to let go a little bit. So I'll, if I find that piece, I try to encourage them, like, maybe explore that more. If that's what you're having fun, like, think about what you would want to do for 40 pages. Like, probably not the one that you're struggling with.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the way we build the workshops here is allowing people at their different skill levels. Mm-hmm. So whether you're kind of beginner, intermediate, or expert, you're going to take something away from the instruction and the hands-on demos. And so it sounds like it's the same with the critiques.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a lot of times new illustrators will apologize. It's like, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot. I'm like, don't apologize.
Yeah, no, you showed
Don't
up.
need to apologize.
You're
here.
here. That's what's important. Like, we're
Yeah.
glad that you showed up and that you're working on improving. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's the big step. Well, and it sounds like you're willing to be kind about the feedback.
I think one of the things that came up in the Q&A yesterday, I brought up a story that Kelly Light had told about how she received some very harsh feedback, and she felt so dejected. And so I think as art directors, I really want to keep that from happening in illustrators. I genuinely believe that anybody could make it in the industry, and it's about whether or not you're willing to do the work and spend the time and put in the effort to make yourself good enough to do it. And so I was talking, my piece of advice that I left them with yesterday was, find yourself a cheerleader, like someone that is in your inner circle, someone who believes in you so deeply that when you lose your confidence, because it's going to happen as an artist.
It even happens to us.
Yeah, it
as art
happens to me
directors.
all the time. When you lose your confidence, who are you going to call? Who is going to be the person that bucks you back up again? Because that person is invaluable to have in your life. And coming to workshops like the ones that are provided at the Highlights Foundation can be so valuable because you build that community of cheerleaders who help you to get to the next level and who help you believe that you are capable of drawing. It's so important to have that person in your life.
And I will say, obviously, our job is to provide constructive critique. So that might not always be sparkles and sunshine. We're going to tell you the things to work on, but we want to do it in an encouraging way so that you're not leaving thinking, I need to quit this path.
Thinking, yes, I know how to go to
being
the next
like, okay,
step.
I have, even if it's a baby step, I have this step. This is what I'm going to work on for the next thing that I go to.
Mm-hmm. We want to leave you with that optimism. I think that's the most important thing for us, is that you feel hopeful when you walk out of a critique with us.
Good. Thank you. That's what we want. People to feel inspired, encouraged.
Yeah, exactly.
So before we go, tell me, so Jen, you have you are an artist as well. Talk a little bit about your art.
Sure. So I illustrate as well. I have a little greeting card company called Charming. And actually I told a little bit about this last night at the end of the Q&A because I struggled a lot figuring out my own illustration style, which I think is helpful for other illustrators to hear. But I was working in publishing and then I left for a little while because I wanted, I was younger, I wanted to get experience doing other stuff, maybe designing at a studio, maybe doing my own thing. So I went freelance for a little while. And when I sat down to draw, I was like, I don't remember how I draw anymore. Like it was painful instead of fun. So I put Gilmore Girls on in the background because they talk a lot. And I was alone in my apartment with my dog and not talking to humans. So I was becoming a very socially awkward human. Treating people like they're dogs, which is not how you talk to people. So I put Gilmore Girls on the background and would just draw random things and try to turn my brain off to see what I naturally just did. And so that's actually how I ended up making all the greeting cards, because I would just draw random things and then I was having fun with it. So I would make little punny sayings. And then before you knew it, I slowly built up enough things that I was like, oh, I think these could be cards. So now I do that for fun on the side. And sometimes I'll take on freelance for like covers or food art. I love drawing food. I love eating food. Food is the best thing to draw. But so yeah, I do the cards a lot, and I have some of them in stores, like little indie shops, nothing huge. So that's what I kind of do. I can't like not be creative when I go. Like it's
out of work creative side.
Yeah.
Great. And Mallory, we'll talk about your creative piece outside of work.
I do a lot of little things. One thing that's come up this year, and I'm a total amateur at, is writing. I've been encouraged by several of my friends who work in the industry. In fact, one of the people that really started the snowball rolling down the mountain is an editor that Jen works with, Wes Adams, and he's like, you might not suck at being a writer. You should try it. And because I have these people who have a little bit of knowledge and are willing to spend some time to critique me, I've been writing a lot, and I've been having so much fun with it. And every time I send some pages out to people, I'm always asking, what can I do better? And so every little time I get a brilliant eureka moment from whomever I've asked it for. And it's been terrifying because I've never thought of myself as a writer, but that's where I'm spending a lot of my side time right now, is on writing.
And I will say, as one of the people who's read some of the synopses, she's a writer.
Good stuff.
Yeah, she's becoming a writer.
So what is it? Do you have like is it a picture book or a middle grade? Do you know what it is yet, or is it more just writing?
Yeah, I was really bored in a meeting one day, and I wrote a picture book, which I don't think it rhymes. So like, take that with a grain of salt. It's a rhyming picture book. But the thing that I spend the most time on is a YA novel that's gotten pretty fleshed out. I've got about 25,000, 30,000 words on it, so we're almost halfway there. So yeah, definitely just trying to spend the time on it to be thoughtful about what the story is going to be and what the voice is and how everything fits together, and seeing if anything sticks against the wall.
So you'll have to return to the Highlights Foundation either for a novel writing workshop or just an unworkshop time.
Oh my God, I would love that.
We both were like,
unworkshop?
Unworkshop. Let's do it.
How do we do this?
Just hole up in the cabin and write or create.
Yeah, no, having that time would be really amazing.
Thank you, Jen and Mallory, for joining us in Into the Words here at the Highlights Foundation Retreat Center. We are dedicated to continuing our 35-year history of providing the space, the conversations, and the nurturing that goes into making great stories for children. So thank you for all you've done to support the Highlights Foundation this week, and more importantly, thank you for all you do to support that belief that children are the world's most important people.
It was a pleasure.
It was. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.